Want to know on three. 1, 2, 3.
Want to know.
Hit it. Welcome, hola, and bonjour. You're listening to the official 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. It's time to join your host, the Commissioner Extraordinaire, the Fantasy Football Trademonger, Owen Odog Drake.
Welcome to a post-fantasy draft edition of 1-0 Fantasy Football, where you're the one and I'm the O. Today, the one is also no one. Odog's taking the reins here himself and giving this a go solo. As you can tell from previous podcasts, this isn't really my goal. What I want to have is some consistency in my hosts and guests, but at this time, it just doesn't seem possible, so here we are. Kate always says I get a little bit formal when it's just me reading from my script/notes in the show doc. So please provide feedback on how this next chapter of the 1-0 Fantasy Football venture goes. The feedback would be very much appreciated. I'll keep reaching out to my usual guests who I have chemistry with and prefer. So engage with the show. Let me know who y'all like listening to the best. My dad, Anthony, Joel, Josh, and let's pressure them into joining again, shall we? The last thing I'm popping in here is a reminder to like and follow the show on the socials. Check out 1-0 Fantasy Football on Facebook and Instagram as @1-0 Fantasy Football, on Twitter as @1-0 Fantasy, and on YouTube as 1-0 Fantasy Football. Currently, on the Facebook and Instagram channels, 1-0 Fantasy Football has a free signed jersey contest running. Like and share the post, as well as liking and following 1-0 Fantasy Football on either Facebook or Instagram, and you are immediately entered into a draw to win a signed Gabriel Davis jersey, breakout wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills. Without further ado, let's ramp to champ.
Ramp2Champ.
The format of Ramp2Champ today is going to be a little bit different, as y'all can already tell. Kate isn't live with us. Rest assured, she's prepping for a Monday night show recording that I'm aiming to publish on Tuesday. Today's show is going to be jam-packed with my analysis, ratings, and rankings from the recent Ramp2Champ draft. Content that you don't want to miss, especially if you're in the league. This week is the first week of the NFL season. We made it with the Bills journeying to the defending champ's house in LA to battle the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday night. With that being said, let's take a minute here to talk about the structure of 1-0 Fantasy Football going forward. On Mondays, there will be an episode posted. I'll be recording on Sunday night to bring you the stories of the weekend, the fantasy football big thrills and road kills. That being the players that, excited us for fantasy football and those that disappointed. I will then segue into talking about the players you should be prioritizing for waiver wire pickups, which are claimed before Tuesday at midnight and processed Wednesday mornings. Well, Owen, what if there's a big name waiver pickup that plays Sunday or Monday night? Well, that's where Ramp2Champ comes in. Kate and I will be recording on Monday nights, so we'll be able to cover any last-minute recommendations to our waiver wire lists then, and if anything crazy happens during the Monday night game or even on Tuesday, I'll pop onto this mic and add that to the Tuesday pod, making sure to post about it on social media so y'all are aware. Okay, so then after those two podcasts, there's going to be another two coming your way. One recorded on Tuesday night, previewing the Thursday night game and half of the other games that are going to occur that week, providing you with the confidence to set and adjust your lineups as you see fit. Then the other will be recorded on Friday to be posted Saturday in advance of the remaining half of the matchups. Now, I'll be going into further detail on these if that wasn't enough, and then also releasing them as we get into the groove and the rhythm of the fantasy football season very, very soon. For now, let's hop into the first snap. I think the only standard part of the Ramp2Champ podcast you've been accustomed to that made it into this show.
Snap.
So in the first snap today, we're going to keep this section brief. As I mentioned, we've got a lot to get to. First, I want to celebrate and be in awe of some stuff from draft night. The headline is that we had a fantasy football manager drafting from a helicopter. No, y'all, it wasn't me. I've had a couple of friends reach out and say, when did you become a helicopter bush pilot? Now, that would be an incredible story and an incredible investment for the pod. So, Luke, maybe if you're listening, look out for my forced invitation next year so I can also experience the same thing. But as I mentioned, a friend from high school, Luke, he messaged before the draft that he's going to be drafting and flying, saying that he'd have a bird's eye view and perspective. If you haven't seen the shots from his draft, this was legendary. He first apologized that the timer may run all the way through his 90 seconds if he was busy. And how do you get mad at that? A dude's literally flying. Then he sent a picture of the draft copter, as it was named for the night. And then a picture of his aerial view with the NFL fantasy screen up on a tablet beside the flight controls. And then a picture of the rubber duck attached to the controls dubbed Coach Bruce. No spoilers here on his final draft grade, but Luke's team from the sky was one that I really liked immediately post-draft. And he only timed out twice. So professional at drafting, professional at flying helicopters. Let's go, West Coast Senders. Managed by Luke, my buddy from high school. Now, let's move on to a different type of draft story. The story of one of our Stevens. We have multiple Stevens in the league who drafted a player who minutes before the draft was reported to have suffered 3 gunshot wounds due to a robbery. So, who is this player? Best wishes go out to Brian Robinson, running back of the Washington Commanders, who luckily escaped major injuries. It sounds like the bullets passed right through his knee, avoiding major injuries there. And now Steven, our manager, messaged the group after the draft and simply asked if we could make the draft the day before the season starts next year, as he'd optimally not like to draft someone who gets shot multiple times before the first game. As Robinson that day actually was rumored to be declared the starter in Washington at running back. Now, while I sympathize with Steven, let's talk about this for a second. The last weekend of August is usually known as Fantasy Draft Weekend. Why is this? Well, the preseason games have usually wrapped up or have wrapped up at that point, and there wouldn't be more injuries from that, which is predictable. And the Labor Day weekend that comes after is usually a pain to try to organize like 9 to 11 people plus yourself to draft during vacations, trips, plans. And then after that weekend, the season starts pretty soon. And again, organizing that many people during the weekdays has proved difficult in the past. And now let's go back to the specific injury. I did share the news on 1-0 Fantasy Football's socials prior to the draft, or at least it was all over the sports networks. And this was a very unpredictable occurrence. We know that injuries can occur during preseason games, but the likelihood of a player being shot, and I'm not laughing at the fact that he was shot, it was more of just the likelihood and like the probability that it happened minutes before our draft. Not that the world revolves around us, but the fact that the likelihood of this happening right before the draft it's got to be pretty low. So all in all, taking a step back, Steven, we're taking your recommendation into consideration for next year. But hey, man, this is just a chance now to prove your chops at fantasy football, show the resiliency, and that the draft isn't everything, because it's not. So on that note, I've got a ton to get to recapping the recent Ramp2Champ draft that I've been alluding to. So let's dive in, shall we? Hit the new sounder on.
Ramp2Champ draft grades.
Draft day is like Christmas. Kate got the full experience of it this year. I'm not sure if it was this draft in my league, a record draft, which were back-to-back days, but I was walking around the apartment singing, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." And if you know me, you know that I'm not lying. I like draft day better than Christmas. I get more excited about it. Christmas, really not my thing, but we can get more into that as we go here. So before I move into my notes on each team, which are on paper with a pencil, because sometimes I'm an old soul, let's talk about my system. I began the process by participating in the draft, and then stepped away for what I wanted to be a minimum of 48 hours to let the initial impressions of each team fade. During that time, members of the league got their draft grades from NFL.com Fantasy, which always amused me, if I'm to be honest. Why do they amuse me? Well, because, I have certain beliefs, as I've voiced on this podcast, and gave my statistical and, even narrative reasoning why. And I've just honestly never found them to be accurate. And this was on full display this year, as my projected finish in this league on the NFL.com fantasy report card was 1-13, tying for 11th place. And although I did not see who was projected for a last place and a winless season, but I'm very, very curious, wondering if it's the same one as I have at the bottom of my rankings. But before I continue, I also just want to emphasize that the draft is not everything. We talked about it on the last podcast. It was in kind of those draft tips, but kind of buried in there was the fact that active managers are the ones that are going to win the league. You're not going to win the league. You're not going to win any league if you're not active, if you're not paying attention to the news that's coming out with the new players that you need to add to your team, the players that you need to drop and move on from. And that's where I really come into my own. I hope that y'all have enjoyed the ranking series and everything that goes along with it. And I'm relatively confident in my process for that. But what I do know for sure is that I'm the type of fantasy football manager that is just, like I talked about, tenacious. Like, I want all of the information. I'm going to be sharing it with all of you, and I'm only getting better as the season goes on. I am very rarely one of those managers that wins the first 6 weeks. My team's more of that slow build that you actually kind of look for in the NFL too. You might have a couple of weird losses off the start, but once they start figuring it out and they build towards that Lombardi, and that's what we're going to do together. We're going to build towards your fantasy football trophy. I mean, for those of you not in this league, because believe me this, I am going to be going all in for that first Ramp2Champ trophy. So anyways, I thought I'd have a go at the report cards myself. I fired up Excel, starting setting the formulas, and I set each part of my analysis as a separate section with different weights. Quarterbacks were worth a maximum of 10%. Running back starters, 20%. Wide receiver starters, 20%, showing the discrepancy in the value, as we've talked about before, between the running backs and the wide receivers and the quarterbacks. Then running back depth and wide receiver depth, I gave each 10%. Tight end, 15%. Flex position, as it's currently set, as 10%, and the kicker/defense for 5%, showing my disdain for that position, for a total of 100%. I then took each team, rated them based on my confidence in each category, my rankings, other rankings across the fantasy football space, as well as by comparing against the other teams in this league. For each team, I'll present the roster, their grade and rank according to me, their strengths, weaknesses, which is really kind of the content that you want to hear, their best picks, their worst picks, and then we'll kind of just see how this season goes down, shall we? Let's jump in. So, coming in at 12th on my rankings, A newbie to the fantasy football space, a team called Bye Week, managed by Mike. Mike's QB, Josh Allen. His starting running backs, Rashad Penny and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. His wide receivers, Mike Evans and Cooper Kupp. His tight end, Pat Freiermuth. His flex position, DK Metcalf. Kicker, Justin Tucker. Defense, Miami Dolphins. And on his bench, Mike currently has quarterback Patrick Mahomes, running back Rachaad White, wide receiver Treylon Burks, wide receiver Isaiah McKenzie, wide receiver Kadarius Toney, and tight end Albert Okwuegbunam. Now, this draft from my rankings and ratings turned out to be rated a 68.8 for a 12th place finish, giving it about a C+. Bring out the teacher side, no one. So let's talk about the team. So the strengths, I mean, if you're paying attention and you know your fantasy football stuff, strengths are definitely at quarterback. When you have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes, if you're sitting at home and you're also wondering, well, what did he have to invest to get that? We're going to get to that, but it's the strength nonetheless. A huge strength at wide receiver with Evans and Kupp, that especially in a PPR league, that's just going to start running teams down. And also a strength at kicker. He was able to wait till the double-digit rounds to grab Tucker, I believe in the 10th round. So that was some good value. Like we mentioned, you want to start the kicker run or be the last person to select a kicker because they don't matter. So Mike made a good investment there. Now, some big weaknesses on this team. At running back and tight end, those are some areas for Mike to focus on. At running back, Rashad Penny and Clyde Edwards-Helaire do not exactly inspire confidence. Rashad Penny consistently injured, but Kenneth Walker III is currently rehabbing from his hernia injury. So a great start to the year from Penny, but an area that Mike might look to bolster with more free agent pickups as the season goes on. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I've talked about him on this podcast before. He's the guy that I always draft every year since his draft, and I'm happy to report that I avoided him on both of my drafts of note, including this one. So I don't know what's going to happen this season with Clyde, but it doesn't look like there's anybody of note to challenge him currently. So, I mean, just keep an eye on it. And he might be able to be used as trade bait. I've used them multiple times. So, another weakness, tight end, Pat Freiermuth. I don't project much confidence in this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. I've discussed this at length. I don't know what's going to happen with the rushing proclivity of Mitchell Trubisky and the switch over to the rookie quarterback. I've mentioned the footballer's fact that a rookie quarterback 70% of the time fails to produce a wide receiver 36, and I can't even imagine what that would do to a very promising, I'll admit, tight end in Pat Freiermuth. So a little bit of a weakness there. And Albert Okwuegbunam on the bench could be a breakout. So it's good. You know, Mike is using a great strategy where if you're probably the last or second last to select a tight end in your league, grab an extra one because you could have a breakout one on your hands between the two. And if you don't, then you just focus on it. You go grab them first, grab the breakout tight end first week. So let's talk about Mike's best pick. The pick of Rashad Penny was an excellent pick. Drafted in the 7th round after most of the running back starters, if not all of them, were gone. Mike snagged him. It was an excellent pick. Another pick that I want to highlight was the pick of Mike Evans. I believe this was in the 3rd round. Yep, right at the start of the 3rd round. Just an absolutely reliable wide receiver that was passed on by other teams, and we're going to get to them and I mean, maybe throw a little shame on the other teams for letting him fall there. But the package of Kupp with his first pick and Evans with his 3rd is just, it's probably the tops of the league at that wide receiver position. So kudos there, Mike. And great picks. And I've already mentioned the kicker, Justin Tucker. That's a very reliable and a positional advantage pick as well. So let's wrap up our analysis of Mike. Let's talk about some of his worst picks. Now, I mentioned that he's got both Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. These were selections at 23 and 47th overall. Now, to give you some context, some players that he missed out on from these two selections, you got Keenan Allen going at 24th overall as the 1A or 1B on the Justin Herbert offense. You got James Conner going at 28, Javonte Williams going at 29, Michael Pittman going at 30, Saquon Barkley at 32. All of those would represent upgrades to either the running back or the wide receiver position. And now I understand that his wide receivers core is extremely strong, but yeah, it's hard to pass up that value for a quarterback is really what it comes down to. And okay, let's say we leave the Josh Allen pick there, then what was the need for a Mahomes pick in the 4th or 5th round there at 47th overall, where you could have taken J.K. Dobbins? That would have been an excellent pairing with Rashad Penny to go kind of 0 RB and scoop up some of the value running backs later. Brandon Cooks, who would represent a significant upgrade on DK Metcalf, who was grabbed later. Cortland Sutton, like this team could have been built in a slightly different way. And I just wanted to highlight that as we learn from reflecting on our drafts. And the last one that I wanted to highlight here was the Dolphins pick in the 9th. The Dolphins faced the Patriots, the Ravens, the Bills, and the Bengals, which I would think are 4 of the top teams in the league in their first 4 weeks. I'm not sure if Mike actually drafted this one or if this was an auto draft, but the Dolphins in the 9th, where you could have had Robert Woods or Christian Kirk as wide receiver options there, or any running back shot in the world with the running backs that is on his roster, it just doesn't represent value. And I don't even think you're going to be able to use them for those first 4 weeks. So that's my thoughts on Mike's team. And I'm projecting just based on the draft. We got to see the activity that comes. Of course, the draft is not everything, but this was the 12th best draft in the league, in my opinion. Okay, so we're going to move on to my 11th best draft by my rankings, but who might be the number 1 in terms of team name, Smokey Joe's Gridiron Heroes, a team managed by Tony. So at the quarterback position, Tony invested heavily, having 2 quarterbacks, and you're beginning to see a bit of a theme here in the bottom 2 of the league from my projections. Aaron Rodgers invested as the starting quarterback, but also Joe Burrow sitting on the bench. At running back, Tony has Leonard Fournette and Cam Akers. At wide receiver, Tyreek Hill and Mecole Hardman. And then at tight end, George Kittle. Flex, Ramondre Stevenson, running back. Kicker, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. And that was replicated with the defense, the Buffalo Bills. We already mentioned that Joe Burrow is sitting there first on the bench, and he's joined by running back Melvin Gordon, running back Khalil Herbert, wide receiver Chris Godwin, wide receiver Julio Jones, and tight end Gerald Everett. So for Smokey Joe's Gridiron Heroes, managed by Tony, we got a draft rank of 69.8, which slotted him in at 11th and about a C+. His strengths, well, we mentioned it at quarterback, Aaron Rodgers and Joe Burrow. One of those two is going to be a top 10 quarterback. In my opinion, like one of these two has to work out. Like the chances of having an NFL season where Joe Burrow or Aaron Rodgers is not relevant it's not going to happen. So big strength there. I liked the early investment on Leonard Fournette as his running back 1. Maybe a little bit early on the value, especially considering where the running backs that I was able to take at the 12-13 turn there, but definitely a strength of this team as we look through. Tyreek Hill is a strength as well. And then I noted that his running backs 3, 4, and 5 they were great picks here. Like Ramondre Stevenson is a guy that's really rising in my mind. I project him to take over that New England backfield at some point. And even if he doesn't, he just represents the pass catching value that I want in this backfield. And Damian Harris, he was at a ceiling last year, and he's supposed to be a free agent after the season. So why wouldn't they see what they've got in Ramondre before they figure out what they have to do for next year? So great running backs 3, 4, and 5 in Ramondre. Khalil Herbert, who's got the talent to take over that backfield and has been rumored to taking first team snaps with the Bears. And then Melvin Gordon in an eerily similar situation with the Broncos. So it's great to see Tony taking some shots on some backup running backs that could really, really become those top 12, top 24 running backs should an injury occur to the running backs in front of them. And we all know that running backs, they get injured. So let's move on to some weaknesses. And my first note here is wide receivers after Tyreek. So in the starting lineup, we got Mecole Hardman. And I kind of paused there a little bit as I was reading it through, but yeah, that like Mecole Hardman is probably the third best wide receiver on the Chiefs. It's a nice shot, but definitely one later in the draft. It could have been one that was put into the lineup by the optimization tool. Unfortunately, Smokey Joe's doesn't exactly have a better option, which optimization will become a factor as we keep talking here. But Chris Godwin, he's injured. He's not going to be ready for the start of the season, but that's basically your wide receiver too. You could put Julio Jones in there, you know, while he's still healthy, I guess, right? Got to take advantage of that. So it's, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not good, but there's hope. You know, you got Tyreek. He's going to be very involved. You got two relatively solid running backs and a great flex. So this team ain't looking too bad. Now let's talk about the running back too. Cam Akers could be great. Although he has been working his way through an injury and he is rehabbing from that Achilles tear of last year. So this might be the riskiest roster in the league, where if Cam Akers comes through, then all of a sudden this, and Ramondre Stevenson as well, this team looks a lot better. But currently as it looks, uh-oh. And my last weakness that I wanted to note here was the Buffalo Bills. Similar to the previous defense that we talked about, the Bills start off with the Rams in week 1, the Titans, the Dolphins, and the Ravens. And while they're not at the immediate top tier that we just talked about of offenses to play against with the previous defense, these are defenses that you don't want to play against. They're not the ones that are going to grab you points. So we're relying on the Bills' skill on defense to slow down these offenses, and usually offenses, they kind of win. So might be an area to look at for fixing for Tony. Now, Tony's best pick, I've mentioned it a couple times here, Ramondre Stevenson at 106th overall to potentially get this starting running back with pass catching chops in a PPR league. Let's go. Now, because this is the 11th best team, we're going to focus a little bit more on the worst picks here, unfortunately. So let's start off with the quarterbacks again. So we're going to talk about Burrow and Rodgers. Burrow was taken in the 3rd round. So obviously, I think there has been some optimization button pressing by Tony here that's gone on. Burrow as a 3rd round pick should have been slotted into that quarterback 1 slot. But I mean, between Burrow and Rodgers, you can't really go wrong for starting them. Just take a look at the matchup. But again, let's talk about the fact that we invested in a quarterback in the 3rd round and the 8th round. In the 3rd round, there was other options like Travis Etienne. That would look a lot better than Cam Akers. Mike Williams, that would look a lot better than Mecole Hardman, Marquise Brown, T. Higgins, Ezekiel Elliott, DJ Moore, Elijah Mitchell. These guys all went between 36 and 45 and could have been snagged by Tony to make this lineup look a lot more solid and a lot deeper. Then we look at Rodgers at 87, Antonio Gibson at 90, Ayuk at 94, Lazard at 96, Woods at 101, and Kirk at 104. All of these representing options that would be a significant upgrade on either Cam Akers with those top options that we talked about and Mecole Hardman as those bottom options. So those quarterback picks, they really sink you. And Tony, I thought you were listening to the pod, my man. A quarterback early and 2 quarterbacks? Come on. And then the last point that I want to talk about here for Tony was a Chris Godwin investment at 58th overall. No slight to Chris Godwin. Love Chris Godwin. Great player. It's just the injury, you know? A late season knee injury. And then you had guys going behind him like Gabe Davis at 59, Darnell Mooney at 60, Elijah Moore at 65, Amon-Ra St. Brown at 66, and Juju Smith-Schuster at 69. All of these players would have represented significant upgrades to Mecole Hardman in that slot, and you wouldn't have to wait on Chris Godwin to recover from that injury. Just my thoughts, but Smokey Joe's Gridiron Heroes, the 11th ranked team in the Ramp2Champ League. That's a wrap. All right, so we are moving on to my 10th ranked team, which we go from a great name to just a name? TBD, a team managed by Sam. Now, this is the team that had the number 1 pick. So how did they get all the way down to 10th in your rankings, Owen? I'm going to answer that. At quarterback, Sam has Justin Herbert. His running backs starting are J.K. Dobbins and Jonathan Taylor. At wide receiver, Keenan Allen and Jerry Jeudy. Tight end, T.J. Hawkinson. At flex, Allen Lazard. Kicker, Jason Sanders of the Dolphins. The defense, the Chargers. And then on his bench, quarterback Matt Ryan, running back James Cook, running back Alexander Madison, running back Tony Pollard, running back Raheem Mostert, and wide receiver Garrett Wilson. Now, this isn't the exact lineup that you'd see in the league because I believe that Sam has pressed the optimization button. So for the purposes of this exercise, I moved Lazard into the flex over Garrett Wilson. Lazard is going to be Rodgers' number one target. Make no mistake. And Garrett Wilson is still practicing with the number 2 offense of the Jets. So that was an easy switch. Sam, if you're listening, you can make that switch. I wouldn't give recommendations on this podcast that I don't believe in. And at quarterback, you do have Matt Ryan in there, but make no mistake, your quarterback 1 is Justin Herbert. Okay. So now we have another team with a double quarterback investment. And we're seeing the theme of where these teams are coming out ranked based on their strengths at the different positions. So Sam's team, TBD, we'll get a name in there sooner rather than later, right, Sam? But anyways, I had them up at a 74 rating, about 5 points up from our last team at a B-, looking pretty good, pretty solid, to be finished at a 10th place ranking after the draft. Strengths, quarterback, Justin Herbert, number 2 ranked quarterback across many platforms. And having Matt Ryan there is, well, I mean, fine. He's 38 and we'll see how he does, but he's never really been a touchdown thrower, so I'm not really sure where the investment was there. But hey, maybe a late career resurgence. It's just hard to see him slotting into the starting lineup over Justin Herbert. You know what I mean? So another strength, running back. Obviously, you got Jonathan Taylor and J.K. Dobbins. He was one of the reasons why this ranking started to go a little bit lower. Like I really wanted to see more strength at that running back position, but it doesn't sound like JK is going to be 100% for like the first month of the season. And that impacts how you feel about your fantasy football team and how they do obviously in the standings, right? We're all trying to get off to a hot start here, qualify for the playoffs first and foremost. So that did kind of drop him down a little bit, but make no mistake, J.K. Dobbins is an absolutely talented running back. And when he's back to full strength, that running back core that he's got is going to look very, very strong. Another strength, the defense, a little bit. The Chargers are great, but unfortunately, I'm projecting them not to be the greatest start for the first 2 weeks, playing against the Raiders and the Chiefs. Tough matchups there for a great defense, but then they get to take on Jacksonville and Houston. So that's what kind of made them a strength, but Sam might want to look into another defense maybe for those first 2 weeks, but definitely for that Kansas City week. Let's talk about his weaknesses here. Wide receiver. I'm in the same situation as Sam is in my league of record. I completely bypassed wide receiver for a while. Keenan Allen, very steady for him. But the problem is that after that, it's Jerry Jeudy, where the rumors out of Broncos camp are that it's Sutton all day and every day. And then it's Allen Lazard, who's also still a projection. But then there's no other wide receiver on the roster except for Garrett Wilson with the Jets. So the depth really is the problem. But also, I would like a more confident wide receiver too in there. And we can point to his best pick as maybe part of the reason where you get Jonathan Taylor. So then you kind of have to figure it out after that, after waiting 23 more picks or 22 more picks to get to your picks. So best picks, Jonathan Taylor first overall, easy. Allen Lazard in the 8th round was a stroke of brilliance that might actually save this wide receiver core. And J.K. Dobbins at 48th overall, that was an excellent pick as well. But like I mentioned, you got to wait a few weeks to get him back to full strength. So, could either be the best pick of the draft for you or the worst pick of the draft for you, Sam. So something to keep in mind if you're drafting and if you have drafted, audience, J.K. Dobbins. Now, let's talk about the worst picks here. We mentioned that there was 2 quarterback investments. Herbert was very early with the first pick of the 3rd round at that turn, where he could have had Mike Evans. Mike Evans and Keenan Allen would be a nasty pair to have at wide receiver instead of investing highly in that quarterback. Kyle Pitts was there. He would look excellent instead of TJ Hawkinson, James Conner, 28th overall, Javonte Williams, Michael Pittman. All of these guys would have been better fits for this roster than Justin Herbert, and then you could have scooped up a quarterback a little later. In my mind, the investment wasn't worth it, and especially when you doubled down and grabbed Matt Ryan later. Now let's talk about the Jerry Jeudy pick. When Jerry Jeudy was picked, there was guys that I definitely have more confidence in after. Brandon Cooks was picked 3 picks after Jeudy, and Sutton was the pick after that, and then 6 more picks later, Gabe Davis. All of these guys would look a little bit better, in my opinion, than Jerry Jeudy there. And because you had picks back-to-back, maybe could have been Jeudy and Brandon Cooks, or Jeudy and Sutton. Maybe not both the Broncos receivers, but you see my point. Like, Brandon Cooks always in those top 14 wide receivers. Passed up for Jerry Jeudy? Come on, man. So that's a wrap on the TBD squad by Sam. Fix that optimization, my friend. And we're projecting, just based off the draft, 10th best draft. Okay, so we're moving on to my 9th rated draft, the Dastardly Doggos, Trevor. So a lot of people liked this draft of Trevor's, and I do have it a little lower, and we're going to get into why. At quarterback, my quarterback love was stolen from me by Trevor here, but Jalen Hurts. Running backs, Christian McCaffrey and David Montgomery. Oh, and why is he all the way at 9th with those players? Well, hey, let me get to it. Wide receivers, Deebo Samuel and Amari Cooper. Tight end, Kyle Pitts. Flex, Brandon Ayuk. Kicker, Younghoe Koo. Defense, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. On his bench, Trevor has running back Damian Harris, running back Mark Ingram, running back James Robinson, wide receiver Chase Claypool, wide receiver Hunter Renfrow, and tight end Mike Gesicki. So all in all, rated this draft at a 76.1 for a solid B. That was at 9th in my ratings, and let's get into why. Strengths, running backs. You heard them. Christian McCaffrey, David Montgomery. David Montgomery was an excellent pick where he was taken because Trevor made the decision to invest early in Kyle Pitts at the tight end position, having a positional advantage there. Love that. And that was the other strength that I noted, was at that tight end position. The problem, though, was that led to weaknesses. So let's start with the defense and the kicker. Younghoe Koo, great kicker. Great sort of reclamation story, for sure. But he plays for the Falcons, and the Falcons ain't going to score that much. They've been a little bit more dangerous on offense and a little bit more dangerous at the kicker position in years past, which makes him ranked higher on these rankings. And kickers don't matter, but if they're not going to get in position to score because they're going to be a brutal team, then what are we doing? At defense, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, this is one of the teams that I called out as a way to tell who's not paying attention when they're drafted, because they started off with Dallas, New Orleans, Green Bay, Kansas City. Those 4 matchups, you could be going negative in all 4 of those matchups, regardless of how good that Bucs defense is. So a couple of weaknesses there, but not as important as the wide receiver position. So Deebo is the one that we're confident in, okay? Maybe not crazy confident, because like I mentioned, there's essentially a rookie quarterback starting there. So we're worried a little bit about Deebo, but still, you can't pass up the value where you get him. But then Trevor doubled down and grabbed Brandon Ayuk. So one of these guys could be great. Both of them could just be mediocre. But doubling down on that 49ers passing attack was probably not a move that I would have made personally. And then you have Amari Cooper, who we're waiting on to see the chemistry with Deshaun Watson as his suspension is 11 games. And that's really the knock here. Amari Cooper as your wide receiver 2 when he's missing his best quarterback and he has to play with Jacoby Brissett. We're nervous. And you can't even bump Ayuk up, because then you're starting both 49ers wide receivers. And if the 49ers don't have a good day, or Lance decides to run in all the touchdowns, or Elijah Mitchell decides to score a couple of them, then there's not much value here in the wide receiver core. And then you look down at the wide receivers that are on the bench. Chase Claypool has reportedly been replaced at that wide receiver 2 role for the Pittsburgh Steelers by rookie George Pickens. And Hunter Renfrow, his late season explosion was due to the absence of Waller, and now you got Devontae Adams in there too. So this wide receiver core just leaves much to be desired. Now, let's talk about the best picks that Trev had in this draft. So McCaffrey at 3rd was a steal. Definitely took advantage of Cup being taken there, but it's a PPR league, so both guys are great picks. I'm not slandering Cup by any means, but Trev scooping up the value of McCaffrey was just beautiful. And then, like I mentioned, the Montgomery pick, where the other running backs available were Dobbins, Josh Jacobs, AJ Dillon. David Montgomery's probably the safest of that group. Not flashy, but he's probably going to be in that top 24 by the end of the season, as long as he stays healthy. Now, the worst pick. I'm going to start off with Jalen Hurts. And I'm okay. Before everybody panics and says, "Oh, and you love Jalen Hurts," it was just the fact that he was at 51 overall, which led to the Amari Cooper pick at 70. So at 51, Hurts was taken. And don't hear what I'm not saying. I probably would have scooped him up in the 6th if he was there. But at 51, right after that, Brandon Cooks went with the 52nd pick. Then Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis at 59, Darnell Mooney at 60. Like, all of these players would have been immense upgrades over Amari Cooper in that second wide receiver chair. Now let's talk about Amari Cooper at 70. So say you still take Hurts, and I love the investment there. That wasn't really the worst pick, but Amari Cooper was, unfortunately. Amari Cooper at 70, you had Rashad Bateman going at 80, where, I know that Lamar Jackson doesn't have the passing volume that a lot of people like to see, but at the same time, we've seen it from Bateman before. And yes, we've seen it from Cooper before, but have we seen it from Jacoby supporting a number 1 wide receiver like that? Not really. And then Michael Thomas at 84. Alan Lazard, who we just talked about at 96, is an incredible value. Like, any of these guys would have looked better at wide receiver 2, in my opinion. So all in all, we're getting into some more solid squads here. But when you can point out the flaws with the 2 49ers wide receivers, the depth that's not there, and Amari Cooper, that's where we're looking to work on as the season gets going here. So that'll definitely be an area that Trevor's paying attention to as the season goes on. All right, let's move on to the 8th rated team in the Ramp2Champ League by my ratings. We got Sacks in the City. Great name, managed by Tyler. So at quarterback, Sacks in the City has Tom Brady. Running backs, Aaron Jones and Josh Jacobs. Wide receivers, Stephon Diggs and AJ Brown. Tight end, Dawson Knox. Flex, Marquise Hollywood Brown. At kicker, Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders. And the defense, LA Rams. On his bench, running back Kareem Hunt, running back Ronald Jones, wide receiver Adam Thielen, wide receiver Tyler Boyd, wide receiver AJ Green, wide receiver Van Jefferson. This is another lineup that I believe has been optimized. Currently in his flex, he has Adam Thielen. And although, Thielen might be a good bet at the start of the season, as the wear and tear of the season hasn't got to him as he continues to age, but Marquise Hollywood Brown should be in your lineup, Tyler. If you're when you're listening, he should be in your lineup. He's going to be the number 1 in Arizona, and it's going to be an absolute shootout in Kansas City week 1. So Tyler's draft, I had it rated at a 78.4 for a B+, and that still fell at 8th. So we're just seeing some of the strength of these teams as we get going here. And speaking of strengths, Tyler's strengths at wide receiver with Diggs and AJ Brown. Tyler, I believe, is an Eagles fan, so got to be really pumped to get AJ Brown. And I'm just really pumped to see AJ Brown as a wide receiver too. I know teams across the fantasy football space have been drafting him as a wide receiver 1, and that would make me nervous. But getting Diggs as that solid option in front of him, and AJ Brown to be that number 2, stroke of brilliance. Then you even go into the wide receiver depth. Marquise Brown is on the bench currently, although I said, get him back up there. But then there's 4 wide receivers on the bench after that. Thielen, Boyd, AJ Green, Van Jefferson. Not saying that we all necessarily agree with the value of these depth players, but, Thielen's a safe bet for touchdowns. We're projecting a drop-off, but it could be next year. Tyler Boyd, if one of those Cincinnati Bengals wide receivers goes down, pops right in. AJ Green, didn't look that great last year as his career comes to an end, but could also be one that's heavily targeted as the suspension to DeAndre Hopkins goes for the first 6 weeks. And then Van Jefferson as that wide receiver 3 with the Rams. Exciting stuff. Another strength at quarterback, Tom Brady. He pretty much just, write him in pen for a quarterback 1-7 finish on the year. he's going to be, this is going to be his last season. He's got something to prove. So I like the investment there by Tyler. And then at kicker, I mean, you got a little bit of the Las Vegas in the AFC West shootout vibes from there. So hopefully we get a little bit more points for Tyler there. And then we segue into the weaknesses. So we mentioned the wide receiver depth as a strength. That came at the cost of the running back depth, where on the bench you have Kareem Hunt. The debates about Kareem Hunt are running rampant through fantasy football, and this might be the one where people take their victory laps after week 1 too, if he has a big week, because the reason why why I'm advising fading Kareem Hunt is that Jacoby Brissett and Deshaun Watson, they are the passers that don't really dump it off to the running backs that much. Deshaun Watson is a quarterback that we know doesn't dump it off to the running backs very much. Now, that might be because he didn't have the greatest running backs, but I don't believe that's the case when he was in Houston. And then you got Jacoby Brissett, who I just don't trust to move the offense down the field. So you're not going to get Kareem Hunt in mop-up duty after they've essentially won the game, which is where a lot of his value came. And I don't think you're going to get a lot of passing work for him. So I don't know. It's great depth for one player, but then Ronald Jones, who barely squeaked onto that Kansas City roster as the only other backup, that'll be an area that Tyler will be looking to gain more as the season goes on, for sure. And one more weakness here at tight end, Dawson Knox. What are the knocks on Knox? Well, Dawson Knox, his top 10 tight end finish last year was buoyed basically only by his 9 touchdowns. Now, with Josh Allen, that's something that could definitely continue, but the problem is that touchdowns are not like a stat that we can predict. So it'll be interesting to see if that continues, especially with the fact that Gabe Davis on the Bills, he's such a touchdown presence there. You got Stephon Diggs, who already is on your team here, Ty. So Diggs and Knox, you got to hope you get a lot of those touchdowns in there, but tight end is a weakness of this squad. Ty's best picks, Aaron Jones at 16th overall was a steal. Grab the value there. And then, like I mentioned, Marquise Brown, he's a player that I really want on my rosters. He was traded for a first-round pick to get onto these Cardinals. Just an absolute burner. And Kyler has that amazing deep ball. The investment was there. He is the future with Kyler. Marquise Brown at 40th, excellent pick. And then Brady, as always, you could just write it down as soon as you draft him. Incredible value, no matter what year you've drafted him. At 88th overall here, Tyler Sachs in the city. Great pick. Now, the worst picks. So let's talk about Thielen here. You took him at 64th overall and already have him in your starting lineup. So let's talk about some of the wide receivers that went behind Thielen. You got Elijah Moore, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those guys went immediately afterwards. And then even Michael Thomas at 84th. So, there were better options there as Thielen heads into the twilight of his career, and this could even be the cliff year. So Elijah Moore and Amon-Ra St. Brown just starting off their careers, exciting, young, dynamic, explosive, as opposed to Thielen. But Thielen's got a new offense. O'Connell came over from the Rams to be their head coach. Very exciting. So maybe we're just hoping to grab a little bit of the value there and take a shot. Now, not one that I'm going to focus on too much because it was the last pick of the draft, but we're talking about that running back depth. Ronald Jones. It was rumored that he was going to be cut by the Kansas City Chiefs after they invested minimally during free agency. So one of the bad picks. And then the Rams, they are one of the better defenses in the NFL, but unfortunately they start off the year with Buffalo. Atlanta's a great matchup for the second week, but then Arizona and San Francisco. So you're only getting 1 week of usage out of an 11th round pick for a defense. Now, it is a better pick in the fact that it went in the double-digit rounds, where a lot of leagues, they're taking these Rams a lot earlier. So not too much of a worst pick moniker here, but yeah, always got to keep it in mind when you're investing in these defenses. Look at those early matchups. All right, now let's move over to my 7th rated team from the Ramp2Champ draft, Ramp City. A team managed by Joel, who is also notably been on this podcast and has also a member of my league of record. So how did Joel do in the draft? At quarterback, Derek Carr. Running backs, Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb. Wide receivers, Allen Robinson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Tight end, Darren Waller, getting that Derek Carr and Waller stack again, Joel. Flex, Jalen Waddle. Kicker, Ryan Suckup of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Defense, 49ers. And then on his bench, running back, Antonio Gibson. Running back, Dameon Pierce. Running back, Jamal Williams. Russell Gage, wide receiver. Wide receiver, Tyler Lockett. Wide receiver, Sky Moore. So this grade rated out at 79.1 for a B+. Coming in at 7th on my draft rankings. Strengths, running back. Joel hit these early and often, going with Dalvin Cook and Nick Chubb, as well as Antonio Gibson with the Brian Robinson news, Dameon Pierce taking over that Houston backfield, and Jamal Williams is a shot on the backup. So gotta love that depth and that strength there. And then Joel, your kicker and defense. Ryan Suckup with Tampa Bay, going to be very competitive, score a lot of points this year, kind of go along with the Brady and the excitement of that in his last season. And then the 49ers, I've been kind of hammering on the fact that you want to look for that early matchups, and that's exactly what Joel did here. The 49ers playing Chicago in that horrific offensive line in week 1, then Seattle in week 2, but then after, Joel's going to be looking for a bit of an upgrade as they take on Denver and that explosive offense and the LA Rams. So definitely a strength there for the first 2 weeks in the defense, and the kicker looking great. Now let's talk about some weaknesses for this Ramp City squad. Quarterback. I know Joel might not want to hear this, but Derek Carr is a weakness compared to the other quarterbacks. I do like the stack, but I mean, like I said, is Darren Waller going to get as many targets as we think? Devontae Adams is going to come in and take over this passing game, my opinion, and they're like the best friends with Carr, so maybe that helps propel him to a better finish, but comparing to the other quarterbacks, I'm just not there with Derek Carr, and we'd have to see a return back to that potential MVP season that everybody kind of forgets about. So another weakness here, wide receiver. I don't really think there's a true number 1 fantasy wide receiver here. Allen Robinson, probably in that wide receiver 12 to 24 range. Amon-Ra St. Brown, probably somewhere in there as well. So you saw the investments on running back and tight end early affect this wide receiver core. It's tough. The best pick, Gibson at 90th. I mean, it's kind of, taking a victory lap on an unfortunate tragedy. But, I mean, you got to know your information, and Gibson should have skyrocketed up the draft board with the Robinson tragedy. So, great pick at 90th there. Let's talk about that 49ers defense in the 15th round. Wow. Last pick for Joel, scooping up that defense with 2 great matchups to start off the year. I love that move. And then you could put this in the worst picks, but also, the value was just there. Tyler Lockett fell all the way into the 10th round at pick 114. I'm not confident in him with the Geno Smith, Drew Lock experience either, but there were still boom weeks when he played with, the hobbled Russell Wilson or Geno Smith. It was just very unpredictable, and Russell Wilson's always been kind of his guy. Now that he's gone, nobody's betting on him, but to scoop him up in the 10th was excellent value in my opinion. Now, the worst picks that Joel made here, Darren Waller in the 4th at 42nd overall. You had DJ Moore going 2 slots after, Brandon Cooks going 10 slots after, Cortland Sutton, Gabe Davis, Darnell Mooney. All of these guys would have represented significant upgrades on that wide receiver core. DJ Moore could have been that wide receiver 1. Brandon Cooks, Sutton, all of those guys could have fit into that role really, really well. And then another one that I wanted to highlight here was Jalen Waddle. Now, not saying it's an awful pick. As we get closer to these top 6 teams in the league, it's going to be harder to find the worst picks. But Jalen Waddle in the 5th at 55th overall, when Gabe Davis and Darnell Mooney were still sitting there, you're talking about a guy who's going to be the 2nd wide receiver on his team with Tyreek Hill just dominating targets, with Tua Tagovailoa, who I believe in, but we still haven't seen it. Whereas with Gabe Davis, we know about the chemistry with Josh Allen. Darnell Mooney is going to be the number 1 on his offense. So It's just hard to get there with a wide receiver 2 on a quarterback that we haven't seen do it. So that's Joel's draft. That's the Ramp City. Let's move on to that top 6 now. I know y'all are getting excited. Let's hear about who's in this top 6. My 6th ranked team from the Ramp2Champ League after the draft, coming in as the first team here to break that 80-point rating at 80.5. Password is Taco, a team managed by Steve. So we got quarterback Matt Stafford, running backs Derrick Henry and Ezekiel Elliott, wide receivers Devontae Adams and Michael Pittman, tight end Dallas Goedert, flex Terry McLaurin, kicker Will Lutz from the New Orleans Saints, the defense the Cowboys, and then on his bench we've got Brian Robinson, who we mentioned with the with the unfortunate tragedy of being shot multiple times. He's also on the NFL inactive list. So, Steve, if you're listening, bump him down into that reserve slot. We've got those injured reserve slots for a reason, and grab another guy. That could be a start towards rectifying that draft day slip. Running back Devin Singletary, wide receiver Jacoby Myers, wide receiver Curtis Samuel, wide receiver Sterling Shepard, and tight end Noah Fant make up the rest of Steve's bench. As I mentioned, having a draft rating from my numbers as 80.5 to finish 6th overall, A-. So let's talk about some strengths of the squad. Wide receiver, Devontae Adams, Michael Pittman. Oh, that's good stuff. That's good stuff. And then following it up with Terry McLaurin in the flex, like Terry McLaurin, gotta be excited. I mean, not crazy excited with Wentz as quarterback, but he's still the number 1. And to have him in your flex where most people would have him just as a wide receiver 2, incredible value. And then you move over to the running backs 1 and 2, Derrick Henry and Ezekiel Elliott. Oh yeah, baby. Let's go. Let's get the big boys rolling. I gotta love it. And then kicker, I mean, Will Lutz, a lot of people forget this is a top fantasy kicker. I don't have much else to say about kickers, but he's been a top kicker in the past, so great shot there. Let's talk about the weaknesses of this squad. So at defense, you got the Cowboys. They're starting off with the Buccaneers, the Bengals, rough matchups. Then you do get the Giants and the Commanders. So a couple of good matchups there, but for those first 2 weeks, I don't know if you're getting much value out of this defense. Steve's best pick. Devontae Adams fell to 19th overall in the 2nd round. Just going to soak up targets from best friend Derek Carr. We just talked about that. And then, as I mentioned, you want to just talk about Steve's draft here going Devontae Adams, then Michael Pittman, then McLaurin and Zeke. It's just hitting value after value. Gotta love it. I really liked this draft. Now, let's talk about the worst pick. I mean, this is kind of an easy one. I mean, he did draft somebody in the 8th round at 90th overall that got shot, reported moments before our draft. So just going to talk about some guys you could have had there. Alan Lazard went at 96. Robert Woods, 101. Christian Kirk, 104. Ramondre Stevenson, 106. So had you have known the news, there was options there, Steve. But hopefully Robinson recovers quickly, just from an overall human standpoint, and also from, let's get him back on the field to his NFL dream. And then let's talk about the Stafford pick. I mean, at that point in the draft, it was the best quarterback remaining, but we're still hearing reports about this arm injury lingering all season. So that might be an area for Steve to look at after week 1. Maybe look at one of those, look at some streamers if there is really a problem there with Stafford. So moving on to my 5th rated team from the Ramp2Champ draft, we've got our co-managers, Steven and Lena's team, Bateman and Robin. Love the name. Love the new name. So at quarterback, Steven and Lena have Trey Lance. At running back, Joe Mixon and Saquon Barkley. Wide receivers, T. Higgins and Rashad Bateman. Tight end, Travis Kelce. Flex, Elijah Moore. Kicker, Denver Broncos, Brandon McManus. The defense, the Browns. They must have been listening to the podcast. And on the bench, running back, A.J. Dillon. Running back, Kenneth Gainwell. Wide receiver, Christian Kirk. Stole him from me. Wide receiver, Alec Pierce. Oh, my Colts. wide receiver David Bell, wide receiver Nico Collins. And then this was one of the teams that used their reserve slot to move DeAndre Hopkins down there. And I believe that was how either Nico Collins or David Bell ended up on the team, maybe Alec Pierce, but regardless, get more players, get more shots. So their draft rating was an 81.7 for another A-. I had them 5th ranked in the league with some strengths at running back in their depth. Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, A.J. Dillon, Kenneth Gainwell. A good 4-pack there. Excellent 4-pack. I mean, I'm not out here saying take Joe Mixon in the first round, but the value was there where they took them, and Saquon Barkley, excellent pick. And then a huge strength at tight end. Travis Kelce, can't say enough good things. Gonna be the tight end 1. Lost Tyreek Hill on that offense. Very exciting. And then QB, like, I kind of have that between the strengths and the weaknesses, because Trey Lance is either going to be a huge advantage or he's just not going to be an advantage at all, you know? This quarterback, his rushing proclivity, I mean, it's got to have everybody salivating. 1,100 yards in a college season rushing on the ground. So Steven and Lena are betting on that as well. So we'll move on to some weaknesses here. At wide receiver, it doesn't really seem like there's a number 2 here. T. Higgins, he kind of flirting with that wide receiver 1-2 range. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But then you have Rashad Bateman, who obviously Steven and Lena believe in very, very highly. And I've mentioned him before as a pick that could have happened for different other teams, but Mark Andrews is the wide receiver, is the top receiving option on the Ravens. Rashad Bateman coming in, we're projecting that breakout, but it's just not a for sure thing. Then you got Elijah Moore and Christian Kirk. So, you know, either one of those guys could come in and be that wide receiver too, but it's not a confidence right now when we're trying to break these teams down. And then I had kicker and defense here listed as a strength that I forgot to mention. So Denver in that AFC West shootout division, Brandon McManus, great kicker pick. And like I mentioned, the Browns, Steven and Lena listening to the podcast, starting off with Carolina, the Jets, Pittsburgh, and Atlanta, 4 of the worst teams for their offenses in the NFL. The Browns defense looking pretty strong this year. And like we talked about, look at the matchups. So Steven and Lena's best pick was Kelce. Let's just put it right out there. He fell all the way to 17th when he's sometimes being taken in that first round. So Kelce at 17, and then Barkley at 32nd in the 3rd round, scooping up value there. And then the guy that they snaked from me, Christian Kirk. Honestly, I would start Christian Kirk over Rashad Bateman week 1. That's me personally, but at 104th in the 9th round was perfect value as we look for these Jaguars to start taking off under a pass-happy head coach, Doug Peterson. Now, let's talk about some worst picks from the Steven and Lena squad. So Nico Collins, I guess he wasn't the one that was picked up. He was picked at 137th overall, so it's more of just a shot. He's that wide receiver 2 in Houston, but like, that's exactly the problem. Wide receiver 2 in Houston. What are we doing? But I guess they could be coming from behind a lot, and this is a second year. So again, it's getting harder to pick out the worst picks from these teams as we get into the higher range here. But also, we'll talk about Marlon Mack in the 15th round. Like, that's our last round. But the problem is that he was cut by the Texans soon after, and Dameon Pierce is just taking over this backfield. So problem there, but I mean, has been moved on from already. DeAndre Hopkins in the 10th round. I liked the value there, but like, I think DeAndre Hopkins is replaced on this offense as the wide receiver 1. We just talked about Marquise Brown. He's just going to be Kyler's best friend. And Hopkins, I don't know if he's coming back to the same target volume. Last year, he was on pace for 94 targets without the injuries, and he's already going to miss 6 games with a suspension. That's a lot of the fantasy season. So again, hard to pick out some bad picks as we get into these top 5 teams, but that's what I wanted to highlight for the Steven and Lena Bateman and Robin squad. Coming in at number 4 on my Ramp2Champ post-draft rankings, the Joel Barkers, a team managed by Curtis. So Curtis at quarterback, Lamar Jackson, running backs, Najee Harris and Michael Carter. Wide receivers, Jamar Chase, Deontay Johnson. Tight end, Zach Ertz. At flex, Gabriel Davis. Kicker, Harrison Butker of the Chiefs. Defense, Indianapolis Colts. And then on the bench, running back, Breece Hall. Running back, Cordarrelle Patterson. Wide receiver, Devontae Parker. Wide receiver, Chris Olave. Wide receiver, Romeo Doubs. And running back, Jerick McKinnon. Now, this came in at a rating of an 81.9 for an A- and put him into fourth on my rankings. We got some strengths on this team. Wide receiver, Jamar Chase, Deontay Johnson, Gabriel Davis. It's looking pretty solid there, albeit, like I said, that Pittsburgh offense we're a little worried about. There was double investment in this Pittsburgh offense here, where you took Najee and you took Deontay. So we're more looking after the draft at the best case scenarios. But again, I have my reasons. We talked about from the footballers, 70% of the time a rookie quarterback fails to produce a wide receiver one. So we're hoping the switch to Pickett doesn't really happen, but he did look a lot better, in my opinion, than Trubisky in the preseason. So some things to think about for sure. Some other strengths, that running back depth. So you might have heard that Michael Carter in that starting lineup, that seems very risky and not exactly what you want to hear from a fantasy football team as the starting running back of the Jets. But the two guys on the bench in Breece Hall and Cordarrelle Patterson is where this ranking comes from. Breece Hall is the running back of this rookie class. I project him to finish in that top 12 as one from the rookie class of running backs, always in fantasy football finishes in that top group. So it's cool that Curtis balanced this out by taking Michael Carter, because you project from these rookies maybe a little bit of a slow start as they share the backfield. So my advice for Curtis would be to put Cordarrelle Patterson into this lineup as an absolute steal. We're going to get to that and then kind of wait and see how this Jets backfield materializes as the season goes on. And then let's talk about the kicker and the defense. Kansas City, we're talking about that AFC West bump, grab those kickers. And then the defense, the Colts, they've really geared up this offseason, got Yannick Ngakoue at that defensive end position to really upgrade there, brought in Stephon Gilmore at cornerback, add that with Shaquille Leonard and DeForest Buckner and the safeties that they brought in and drafted and the other cornerbacks, including Kenny Moore. And you're just looking at a very solid defense who gets to play against Houston and Jacksonville in those first 2 weeks. Great defense pick, Kurt. Now moving on to some weaknesses. Tight end. Zach Ertz was looking like a great draft day value, but unfortunately he's still nursing an injury. So Kurt and anybody else that owns shares of Zach Ertz, you might need to look into a tight end to start week 1 in the event that Ertz can't go. Another weakness at running back 2, we just talked about Michael Carter is currently sitting there, but the team looks a lot stronger with the pass-catching running back Cordarrelle Patterson sitting in there. So that's an area for anyone listening to pay attention to. If you have a weaker running back 2 and you manage to snag Cordarrelle Patterson, throw him in there. Now, Curtis's best picks. I'm going to highlight the Colts here. It was a single-digit defense pick in the 9th, but I love those first 2 matchups, and I love the potential of the Colts defense. And, I mean, Colts fan. And I've talked about how I don't believe in Najee very much as like a top sort of 10 pick, but Curtis was picking at 11th. And when Najee fell to him at decent value, he scooped him up. Then Chase again, scooping up value at 14th. So this team is very explosive at the top with those players. And then, like I mentioned, the best pick of the draft for Curtis and the Joel Barkers was Cordarrelle Patterson in the 8th round. This was a top 10 running back last year, buoyed by all of the passes that he received. And this is a PPR league. So Cordarrelle, an amazing pick in the 8th round. For worst picks, like I mentioned, there were 2 investments in the Pittsburgh offense. So got to keep in mind there that there might be some growing pains as they transition from a Hall of Fame level quarterback, even if he wasn't playing at that level last year, to these new Trubisky and Pickett experiences. There was also a strange pick where Lamar Jackson was picked over Kyler. And that's something that I've been trying to keep in mind this fantasy draft season, is that yes, Lamar did have that insane season where he was the quarterback 1, but all of the other seasons he's finished outside the top 6 quarterbacks. So taking Lamar over Kyler Murray was a bit of an error in my opinion. And then we talked about the Michael Carter part of it. I'm not going to keep hammering on that. And then, the wide receiver depth. So first of all, for context, Devontae Parker, Chris Olave, Romeo Doubs. It's likely that none of these guys work out. So then you're relying very heavily on Jamar Chase, Deontay Johnson, and Gabriel Davis, who are very strong as a top 3, but you'd like to have another one in there. And maybe Chris Olave is that guy. Very high investment from the Saints, but just wanted to call out those guys. All right, let's move on to the bronze, if we can award those, ranked draft of the Ramp2Champ League. Coming in at 3rd and drafting from a helicopter, the West Coast Senders, a team managed by Luke. At quarterback, Dak Prescott. Running backs, James Conner and Elijah Mitchell. Wide receivers, Justin Jefferson, Brandon Cooks. Tight end, Mark Andrews. Flex, Juju Smith-Schuster. Kicker, Matt Gay from the LA Rams. Defense, the New England Patriots. And then on his bench, Luke has Miles Sanders, running back Mike Davis, running back Tyler Algier, wide receiver Devonta Smith, wide receiver Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and tight end Tyler Higbee. Now, for Luke, I've also gone against the optimization of this lineup because I think that's what happened. At running back 2, he has Miles Sanders currently in there, but I believe it should be Elijah Mitchell. And at flex, he has Devonta Smith in there, and I believe it should be Juju Smith-Schuster for week 1. So with this team, the rating that it ended up being was an 82.5 for a solid A-, coming in at 3rd. So the strengths, let's just take a minute and absorb Justin Jefferson and Brandon Cooks. Justin Jefferson could be, and I feel at least the most confident in him finishing as the wide receiver 1 than Brandon Cooks, who's been a wide receiver 8 to 14 his entire career. Let's go, baby. And then an investment on Juju Smith-Schuster as the potential wide receiver 1 with Patrick Mahomes. This team's looking deadly. And then you continue with tight end Mark Andrews, the number 2 ranked tight end in the entire league and the top target for Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. And then let's talk about some running back depth. Miles Sanders. I know a lot of people are fading him, but the more and more that he falls down draft boards, the better value he becomes. And I believe he is the most talented running back there in Philadelphia. Mike Davis. Luke already spent $20 of his fab on this player. He's going to be one of the players that is sharing time with J.K. Dobbins on the Ravens. So I love the investment there. Probably didn't have to spend the full $20, but I mean, what if J.K. Dobbins gets injured really quick and all of a sudden it's the Mike Davis show? Let's go. And then Tyler Algier, he's going to come up again in a second as potentially the worst draft pick, but it's still depth and it's still a shot at a running back. So you got to love that. Now, the weaknesses of this team, we're talking about running back injuries. James Conner and Elijah Mitchell, 2 of the most injured running backs in the NFL when you think about them. And then you continue on to Miles Sanders, very often injured. So those top 3, let's hope they stay healthy. Knock on wood, everybody. And then the wide receiver depth. So like I said, you got Justin Jefferson, Brandon Cooks, and Juju Smith-Schuster, very top heavy. But then after that, it's just Devonta Smith from the Eagles and Marquez Valdez-Scantling on the bench. So Devonta Smith probably losing a lot of his target and passing work production to the arrival of A.J. Brown. Also, Dallas Goedert. Also, you've got a running quarterback. So I'm not projecting much value there from Devonta Smith. And then Marquez Valdez-Scantling, another wide receiver with the Chiefs. So, I mean, between him and Juju, you probably got the number 1 wrapped up here, Luke, or anybody else that has them. So that's great. But double investment in that KC room is not really, it's not really the double investment in any wide receiver running back room is usually hampering your upside. So something to keep in mind. Some of his best picks of the West Coast Senders, James Conner at 20th overall. Now, funny story. James Conner is the guy that Kate has been talking about forever. And when he went off the board at 28th overall and Kate was picking at 29th, there was some despair in this household. James Conner was snaked from Kate, and then she immediately took Javonte Williams, who snaked a guy from the next person in the next manager in line. So we had a double snake in this Ramp2Champ League. And I know Kate's going to be messaging Luke to see if she can acquire James Conner in the coming future. But James Conner, an excellent pick there at 28th. Elijah Mitchell at 45th. That was a great pick as well. And we've talked a lot about Brandon Cooks as another option that people just passed over. And like, he's just one of those guys that people are just bored of, but getting him in the 5th round of your wide receiver 2, who basically performs as a wide receiver 1, all wheels up. Let's go. Then we're talking about Miles Sanders in the 7th to bring some of that running back depth to the team. I love it. Like I mentioned, I just really, really, really liked this draft. Have it at 3rd. Totally makes sense. So some of the worst picks that I want to talk about, Devonta Smith, for the reasons that I already referenced. You had Robert Woods, Christian Kirk, and Ramondre Stevenson going around that range. I wouldn't have recommended, now looking at this team, another running back, but Robert Woods as the wide receiver 1 on the Titans and Christian Kirk as the wide receiver 1 on the Jaguars would have been a much better fit for this lineup, in my opinion. And then we talked about Tyler Algier in the 10th round at 117th overall. At that point, I guess take your shot, but you still got guys that I think are a better shot. Raheem Mostert, Alexander Madison, Kadarius Toney, Darrell Henderson, Kenny Gainwell, all within the next 11 picks after. And Tyler Algier at one point was 8th on the depth chart of the Falcons, who are debatably the worst team in the NFL. And he was 8th on the depth chart as a 5th round draft pick behind a converted defensive back. I mean, that's a fact that's likely to change, but it's not inspiring confidence is really what it comes down to. All right. Now, we're going to go to these top 2 teams. And if you've been keeping up with the teams that we've talked about to this point, it will come as no surprise that you haven't heard Kate and I's team names. Now, no homerism here. I did these ratings in the Excel doc, as I mentioned, and just purely looked at the players on the team. Yes, of course, I'm biased. I'm going to draft the players I like, but I'm going to attempt to convince you why these teams are the number 1 and number 2 rated teams in the Ramp2Champ League. And again, the draft doesn't mean everything either. So come and get us, Ramp2Champ League. Let's go. So coming in at a ranking of number 2 after the draft, the 1-0 fantasy football team. So my team is not number 1. So I managed to snag quarterback Russell Wilson, running backs Alvin Kamara and DeAndre Swift, wide receivers Mike Williams and Michael Thomas, tight end Dalton Schultz, flex Travis Etienne. Oh, I love Travis Etienne. Kicker Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. Defense, the New Orleans Saints. And then on my bench, wide receiver Darnell Mooney, wide receiver Drake London, running back Ken Walker III, running back J.D. McKissick, wide receiver Michael Gallup, wide receiver George Pickens. And then I was able to snag 2 guys and put them on my IR in Gus Edwards and Jameson Williams. So loving that. My draft grade came out to be an 84 even, which is only a little bit above the last teams that we've talked about here, coming out to be an A, to be 2nd overall. So my strengths are at running back. Alvin Kamara and DeAndre Swift, those are my top 2 picks, and they were selected there for their pass catching props in this PPR league. And then you even move on to Travis Etienne. Those running backs, those 3, they're all pass catchers. They're all going to be heavily involved. They're all going to get a lot of action. Let's go, baby. Now let's talk about the wide receiver depth. We'll get into the weaknesses in a second for these wide receivers, but I love the depth that I was able to acquire. Darnell Mooney and Drake London, maybe on bad offenses, but they are the number 1 wide receivers. Drake London with Kyle Pitts in front of him, but they are the number 1 wide receivers on their teams, as well as Michael Gallup, wide receiver 2. When he comes back, he was getting like 6 to 8 targets, even with CeeDee Lamb on there when Amari Cooper wasn't in the lineup. So that's exciting. George Pickens, the exciting player of the preseason. So I'm loving this wide receiver depth. And now, before we get to the weaknesses, I want to point out a lot. I mean, I talk a lot about kickers and defenses on there for strengths and stuff like that, but Evan McPherson with the Bengals, a very, very talented kicker and one that I was excited to get and that I didn't have to take early. And then the Saints defense coming up against, like I mentioned, those Falcons, that debatably worst team in the NFL in the first week with a very, very strong defense. Very excited for that. So let's go Saints, and then could even keep them till week 3 when they take on the Panthers. So weaknesses, wide receiver 1 and 2, Mike Williams and Michael Thomas. Very risky, and they'll push my team over the top if they succeed. But if one of them fails, it's looking risky. Mike Williams was just given a $60 million contract, I believe, to come in and continue that emergence with the Justin Herbert and Staley-led offense there with the Chargers. Very excited about him taking over that wide receiver 1A role over Keenan Allen. Michael Thomas, the forgotten player in NFL fantasy drafts, somehow ranked in like the 1800s or something like that. So able to scoop up that value. And that's not me taking advantage of the league mates. I put that on this podcast. I said, hey, Michael Thomas, he's not even in the rankings. So at some point in your draft, you got to make sure you go get him. And then let's talk about one more potential weakness, Dalton Schultz. I love Dalton Schultz. I have him ranked as my 4th best tight end, and that's kind of projecting the recovery of Michael Gallup, taking a little bit with that week 17 ACL injury. But for now, loving the consolidation of targets to Schultz and Lamb, and loving that in my tight end position, as well as the value where I was able to draft him 3 rounds after Kyle Pitts. So I'm definitely loving that value. So that segues really well into the best picks. So Kamara in the 2nd round, when he's been like that top 6 pick each year, love the value. Love the value. Michael Thomas in the 7th, as I mentioned, not even a ranked player. So once the 7th hit, the alarm bells were going off in my head. You got to go see if you can grab Michael Thomas, especially as I was missing a wide receiver 2. And then, as I mentioned, Dalton Schultz in the 6th round at 61st overall. Loved that pick. Was very excited to grab my tight end 4 there after a bunch of tight ends had actually gone as well. So my worst pick, I think I fell victim to the preseason hype in the George Pickens. But, I mean, you know, he looks like a bully out there on the field, which is great for your wide receivers. Looks like a big, strong feller. And, you know, I not really believing in that Pittsburgh offense, but in the last rounds of the draft, take a shot on the hype. And then I want to talk about my Mike Williams pick. While I do believe that the start of the year breakout last year was very telling and very exciting and something that might have sucked me in. At that point, I've talked a lot about Marquise Brown. He was still sitting there. DJ Moore, Brandon Cooks, Cortland Sutton. All of these guys I feel a little more safe in. But Mike Williams, for the potential, he was wide receiver 1 through the first half of the season last year. Really, really excited about him. So, yeah, that could have been the worst pick, as well as there's just too many rookies on my team for me to be comfortable with, I think. It's not as many as I've had in the past because I do catch a lot of rookie fever, but we're talking about Drake London. We're talking about Kenneth Walker III. We're talking about George Pickens. It's likely that at least 1 or 2 of them is going to bust. So we'll be looking for more players to fill out the roster if they do. So that leads us to the number 1 ranked by my standards team after the Ramp2Champ Fantasy Football Draft. Also with a boring name and managed by my love, Caitlin Johnson. So Kate came into the draft with a plan. We sat down earlier that day and really hammered out a plan. That plan, it wasn't exactly stuck to, if that's the right word, because we had players fall to her where I was sitting there going, wow, I really wish so-and-so fell to me. Scoop up that value. So let's unveil the Kate squad as the number 1. The team to beat in the Ramp2Champ League. Quarterback, Kyler Murray. Running backs, Austin Eckler and Javonte Williams. Wide receivers, CeeDee Lamb and DJ Moore. Tight end, Cole Kmet. Flex, Cortland Sutton. At kicker, Nick Folk, who actually might, not to spoil it, but that might be the team name. What the Folk. And I gotta love that. At defense, the Denver Broncos, great pick up there, Kate. And then let's talk about Kate's bench. Running back Chase Edmonds, running back Nyheim Hines, running back Darrell Henderson, wide receiver Robert Woods, wide receiver KJ Osborne, and tight end Irv Smith. Now, Kate's is another lineup that has been optimized, and I don't have to guess because I know she did it. I was asking her the other day, I was like, hey, did you optimize your lineup? She goes, yeah. And I go, well, it's not what I have done, because Robert Woods being at your wide receiver 2 over DJ Moore and Cortland Sutton, nah. At flex, she's got Chase Edmonds in there, and I don't feel as strongly about this take, but I really think Sutton should be in there over Edmonds. Sutton and the Broncos going to take on Seattle, and Edmonds taking on New England. So I got to say Sutton there, but we'll talk more about lineups as we get closer to the day. And then at tight end, the optimization threw in Irv Smith over Kmet, and that shouldn't be happening. Cole Kmet in a PPR league, getting a ton of passes as the number 2 target in Chicago, got to be the guy. And they're going to be always coming from behind because they're so bad. So after the rankings and the ratings, Kate came in at a solid 85. The only team that I have as an A+, ranked first. And her team was actually called out by other managers in the league as well. I said I liked it as one of the best after the draft, and others agreed. So not too much homerism here. And as you heard going through the lineup, strengths at running back, quarterback, wide receiver, like Austin Eckler and Javonte Williams. Eckler as the PPR running back, really. I mean, aside from McCaffrey, and Javonte Williams being a value that fell down the draft, and one that, I don't know, could have a much better season than James Conner. And then all of a sudden, that draft day hurt of Kate's player being snaked from her kind of feels a little bit better if Javonte outscores him. And Javonte, so talented. We were watching clips of him afterwards, just running over people, carrying people. It was crazy. So gotta love that. And especially on the Denver offense, that's going to be moving a lot. And Javonte sneakily caught a lot of passes last year. Let's talk about those wide receivers. CeeDee Lamb and DJ Moore. CeeDee Lamb fell down the draft board to 20th overall. And Kate was just laughing at that point, going, yep, get him on the team. Number 1 target of Dak Prescott and the Dallas Cowboys, and the only one after Amari Cooper's gone and Gallup's recovering from injury, like we said. So going to be a lot of passes, a lot of PPR points there. And DJ Moore finally has kind of a quarterback with Baker Mayfield, but if his floor is 1,200 yards and 4 touchdowns, and that's around, those top 15 wide receivers, you throw in Baker Mayfield as a slight upgrade, and Kate, you're laughing. You're laughing. And then at quarterback, Kyler Murray fell all the way down to the 68th pick. Kate scooped that up to complete that sort of starting lineup that we were looking at. Chef's kiss there. And then just the depth. I have this underlined, like Chase Edmonds as a starting running back sitting on the bench. Nyheim Hines as a pass catcher. Darrell Henderson in a 50-50 split being reported with Cam Akers. Love that. Bobby Trees / Robert Woods as the wide receiver 1 in Tennessee. Excellent value there. KJ Osborne was a bit more of a shot and one that we're less confident in, but he'll probably be the one that's gone after week 1 after waiver claims go through as well. And then Irv Smith also on the Vikings. We're taking investments in this new offense. There's going to be a lot of passing. And with Cole Kmet being the starter, you got to have another one on the roster because you're kind of in that back end of the tight ends. So take your shots and hopefully one of them works out. So we just talked about those tight ends, but that's where the weakness of Kate's team lies. Cole Kmet and Irv Smith definitely were weighted on in this draft. The worst picks could be those two, but I mean, with the depth that she has, she can always go trade and get a tight end as well, which is a great move because, she'll have a at least mediocre tight end to give back, because mediocre tight ends are all over the place. You just need one of those top 4 as you're going into the playoffs, if you can go get them with your depth. So some of the best picks: CeeDee, I mentioned, at 20th, Javonte at 29th, DJ Moore at 44, Cortland Sutton at 53, Kyler at 68. I loved this draft. I was sitting beside her, extremely envious, and I do love my team, but I mean, you got to give Kate the cake here on the winner of the draft. And like I said, that doesn't mean win you the league, but she's off to a good start. The worst picks I mentioned could be Komet, could be Irv Smith, but you prioritize those tight ends week 1. And then looking back, I did recommend that she took Robert Woods at the slot. She took him, but looking back, that Christian Kirk was picked 2 slots later when I thought he could last to my pick or her next pick. I would have liked to have that one back, but I mean, Bobby Trees could actually outscore Christian Kirk too. So at this point, like I said, at the top part of this, we're just talking about some really, really strong squads, and we're talking about worst picks, just trying to pick out any ones that could be better. So we just went through the teams, and there's going to be some graphics hitting the You Want to Know Fantasy Football social media. So do you agree with my analysis? Do you think I'm nuts? Would you have put me and Kate a lot lower? Tell me, engage with the show, and stay engaged to how the Ramp2Champ season goes. It's off to a good start for some of our newbies. For some of our newbies, not as much, but that's why the fantasy football season is so exciting. We don't actually know what's going to happen. We don't know who the breakouts are actually going to be. We don't know what teams are the greatest and the best. We just know who looks the best going into the season after the draft. So stay tuned in. Tuesday, there will be another Ramp2Champ episode dropping, which could be tomorrow, which could be today by the time you're listening to this. So stay tuned in. For now, this has just been Owen talking for probably an hour and a half after editing, and Owen out.
Okay, everybody, we're done here for today. You're going to want to listen to the next episode of the official 1-0 Fantasy Football Podcast. Odog out.